Welcome to this explainer. Consider this your ultimate high-yield study guide for mastering the absolute foundations of macroeconomics. Seriously, if you've been staring at your textbook just trying to make sense of all these shifting lines and alphabet soup acronyms, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're breaking down aggregate demand and aggregate supply. We're going to use clear visuals straight from the core material to make these concepts actually stick. So grab your notes, get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Here's our roadmap for this session. First, defining aggregate demand. Second, the components of AD. Third, graphing the AD curve. And fourth, mastering aggregate supply.
All right, Section 1, defining aggregate demand. Let's start with what you can literally think of as the ultimate national shopping cart. So to really understand aggregate demand, or AD, you have to zoom way out and look at the entire economy. It refers to the total value of final goods and services that all sectors of an economy are planning to buy at a given level of income, usually over a period of one accounting year. Now here is a massive exam alert for you, so listen up. Aggregate demand represents planned expenditure. It is not the actual real-world expenditure that takes place. In economics, we often call this ex ante, or planned spending. It's all about what households, firms, the government, and the rest of the world intend to spend. That makes it a flow concept, measured over a very specific time period. Now, before we go any further, we absolutely have to clear up a classic test trap. Be extremely careful not to confuse aggregate demand, which, remember, represents the entire economy's total demand for all goods and services, with market demand. Market demand, that's a microeconomic concept. It's merely the total demand for a single commodity in the market. We're talking about just the demand for smartphones or just the demand for coffee. Aggregate demand is the macro view. It's the whole shebang. Moving right along to Section 2, the components of AD. Let's unpack exactly what goes into this giant national shopping cart of ours. Basically, the economy is driven by four key spenders. First up, we have private consumption, or C. This is just everyday households buying consumer goods to satisfy their needs. Second is investment expenditure, or I. Think of private firms investing in capital, like a tech company building a massive new server farm. Third is government expenditure, or G. This is where the government spends on public needs like education and defense, or infrastructure, like funding a huge new national highway project. And finally, net exports, which is represented as X minus M. This is simply the difference between what we export to the rest of the world and what we import from them. As this flowchart perfectly illustrates, when you combine these four components, you get the master formula for an open economy. AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. You can clearly see the distinct pillars here. But honestly, if you're taking an introductory macroeconomics class, you usually don't have to juggle all four of these at once. To keep our studies simple and to focus purely on the core relationship between income and employment, your textbooks are almost always going to use a two-sector model. This model assumes a closed economy. That means we just pretend there's no government interfering and absolutely no foreign trade happening. So we drop G and we drop X minus M. Boom. That brings our formula down to simply aggregate demand equals consumption plus investment. AD equals C plus I. The crucial takeaway here is that for your foundational graphs, we're only looking at the behavior of households and firms.
Okay, Section 3. Graphing the AD curve using that simplified two-sector math. Looking at this schedule, you can see that as income Y goes from 0 up to 600, consumption C also rises right along with it. This creates a really clear upward-sloping AD curve, showing a positive relationship. Now, if this curve were to shift in the real world, you just need to remember these 3 steps. Step 1, a component like investment changes. Step 2, overall planned expenditure adjusts at every single income level. And step 3, the entire AD line shifts parallel, either up or down. But let's go back to our baseline graph for a second. Have you noticed that our starting line doesn't begin at the 0 origin point? Why on earth is that?
Well, it starts higher than 0 because of a concept called autonomous consumption. This is absolutely crucial to understand. It's the absolute minimum level of consumption needed for survival, even if the national income is at 0. Think about it. Even if you lose your job tomorrow and your income drops to absolute 0, you still gotta eat, right? You still need basic shelter. To afford this, you're either going to drain your past savings or you're going to have to borrow money. In our data, when income was 0, consumption was still sitting at 40 crores. That 40? That is your autonomous consumption. And it doesn't stop there. Let's look at the I part of our C plus I equation. In this model, investment is assumed to be completely independent of the level of income. Think of it like a mandatory factory upgrade that's required by new safety laws. You have to pay for it regardless of how much you're making. We call this autonomous investment. In our data, it remains strictly constant at 20 crores, no matter how much national income grows. This creates a perfectly straight line, completely parallel to the x-axis. So your total aggregate demand starting point on the y-axis is at 40 in autonomous consumption, plus that 20 in autonomous investment, which means your AD curve kicks off at 60, not 0. Make sense? All right, home stretch. Section 4, Mastering Aggregate Supply. We've talked about demand. Now, let's flip over to the other side of the macroeconomic equation, the national factory output. Aggregate supply, or AS, is the total money value of final goods and services that all producers are willing to supply in an economy during a given time period. But here's the golden rule. Seriously, lock this in your memory. Aggregate supply is exactly the same thing as national income. Why? Because the total value of the output produced is distributed directly back to the factors of production as income. Think rent for land, wages for labor, interest for capital, and profit for entrepreneurs. When you add all those factor incomes together, you get national income, which we denote as Y. And what do people do with that income? They either spend it or they save it. That's exactly why Y equals consumption plus saving, or Y equals C plus S. Because aggregate supply is a perfect match with national income, graphing it gives you a very specific, beautiful result. By placing income on the x-axis and that exact same value split between consumption and saving on the y-axis, keeping the same scale means your aggregate supply curve is always going to result in a pristine 45-degree line slicing right out of the 0 origin point. Every single point on that 45-degree line represents a spot where aggregate supply exactly equals national income. So, we've covered the core mechanics of AD and AS. from planned spending all the way to that 45-degree supply line. But I want to leave you with a final thought to really ponder for your exams. If income hits absolute zero, and we know from the AD curve that we're surviving purely by draining past savings just to fund our basic autonomous consumption, what eventually happens to our aggregate supply line when those savings run completely dry? Think about the massive ripple effects of that across the entire national factory. Thank you so much for joining me for this study guide explainer. Review these concepts, master these curves, and you'll absolutely crush your exam. See you next time.